Okay, this is the multiple launch rocket system. The multiple launch rocket system is mounted on a M993 Bradley chassis. The firing portion comes from a loader launcher module. "12 rockets, no waiting." It's consisted of a 3-man crew, which is the driver, gunner, and the section chief. The enemy calls it steel rain.
In retrospect, it's tempting to dismiss the Gulf War as an easy win against an overwhelmed enemy. But the Iraqi military's fierce reputation was no public relations ploy. 10 years of brutal conflict with neighboring Iran had created battle-hardened soldiers, and Saddam Hussein had spent his nation's massive oil income on some of the world's most sophisticated weaponry. By all accounts, the Iraqi military had the will and the means to spill unthinkable amounts of American blood.
Perhaps as many as 17,000 surface-to-air missiles.
Going into the Persian Gulf War, U.S. military planners held no illusions of easy victory. It was their job to plan for every worst-case scenario, to anticipate every little secret in Saddam's deadly bag of tricks. Naturally, the threat of chemical warfare was a major concern. Saddam had used poison gas against Iran, and there was no reason to believe that he would spare his Western enemies the same horror. But even more frightening to the military planners was Iraq's massive array of artillery. Historically, artillery is the biggest killer on a battlefield. One well-placed round can wipe out dozens of men, and the Iraqis had the capability to deliver millions of rounds. A cunning commander uses artillery to shape the battlefield, to stun the enemy with a hailstorm of explosions, create destruction and chaos, and manipulate the opposition into fighting the battle on his terms. The menace of Iraqi artillery also posed an enormous problem on Capitol Hill. The hardest thing to sell to the American public is a war that promises heavy casualties. Commander of military forces in the Persian Gulf Theater of Operations, General Norman Schwarzkopf, did not make the fatal mistake of underestimating Iraqi artillery. In fact, he refused to send his ground troops into the desert until Allied flyers had eliminated at least half of the thousands of guns and rocket launchers in Kuwait and southern Iraq. Locating and destroying artillery batteries by air is time-consuming, so coalition forces soon deployed a new weapon to tackle the problem: the multiple launch rocket system. The MLRS waits for the enemy artillery battery to fire, revealing its position. Radar then follows the trajectory of fire, pinpointing the source. MLRS returns a hailstorm of rockets along a trail of electronic breadcrumbs to decimate the target.
The range of submunitions that you can utilize is great. I mean, you can drop minefields behind the enemy, trap them, and you can just blow the hell out of them. You know, with just your regular HE, you can drop things on top of them and kill them. It's got a good range. It's got a lot of lethality. You know, it's like being in a boxing ring with three left hooks instead of one.
Each MLRS battery consists of 9 rocket launchers.
Each division has a MLRS battery, and the corps, which is at the larger scale, have brigades and battalions. The Department Commander's guidance, we pretty much, he positions us in a manner that we'll be able to facilitate fires for the entire division.
Once fired, the rockets race toward their target, their warheads crammed with thousands of tiny cluster bombs. Each bomblet has the punch of a large hand grenade, and the rockets spread them in a neat pattern, shredding a square kilometer on the ground. Coalition forces fired more than 10,000 rockets over the course of the war. The attacks were deeply demoralizing to the Iraqi troops. The MLRS was beyond their reach. It was like a force of nature, a hurricane, a typhoon that arrives without even the courtesy of a darkening sky. The Iraqis were powerless against the onslaught. They called it steel rain. Rockets have been used in countless conflicts, but always took a back seat to conventional artillery. Cannons, mortars, and the like could deliver bigger payloads more dependably. Rocket artillery would not come into its own until World War II. The principal advantage of the rocket was its simple launcher, which was cheaper and easier to make than a finely machined gun. Still, there were problems with the propulsion systems that limited the accuracy of the rockets. The Germans led the world in rocket development, proposing not just long-range guided missiles, but short-range solid-fueled rockets for use in the field. They developed a simple wheeled launcher that fired a volley of 6 rockets. The Wehrmacht called it the Nebelwerfer, meaning smoke thrower. But Allied soldiers quickly nicknamed the noisy rockets Screaming Mimes. The Soviets, also looking for a cheap substitute for artillery, began work on a bombardment weapon of their own. Their multiple launch rocket system, Katyusha, became a prime component of the Red Army's field artillery and is the basis of many of the world's current rocket artillery systems. The Americans had similar bombardment rockets, but moving into the Cold War, they were abandoned in favor of longer-range strategic missiles. The Soviets, however, pursued the advancement of rocket artillery and liberally supplied them to their Warsaw Pact allies. In 1973, the Egyptians and Syrians used Soviet-supplied rocket artillery against Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Reports from the battlefield soon filtered into the corridors of the Pentagon. The Soviet systems had devastated Israeli positions. Army officials wasted no time in proposing a new rocket artillery program. In 1977, the Army initiated a competition between Boeing and LTV Aerospace to design rocket artillery. The contract went to LTV, the same company that had developed the Army's Lance missile. The development of the MLRS was one of the most trouble-free and efficient programs of the entire post-Vietnam period. The MLRS launch vehicle is based on the M993 tracked carrier, a 500 horsepower V8 engine with a fully automatic transmission, and can carry its 27-ton load across the battlefield at more than 40 miles an hour.
The platform that the MLRS is built on is a multinational platform that is used for a variety of different vehicles. Not only the MLRS, there's ammunition vehicles, the Bradley fighting system, and there's variations of this platform on a lot of different vehicles that we're using.
The brain of the MLRS is the fire control and communication system. This computer moves, aims, and fires the launcher and links the crew with the battery clearinghouse, which assigns the fire missions.
I think it's probably one of the easiest systems in the Army. I mean, if you're looking at the panel, if you know your menus, it'll tell you exactly what to do, when to do it.
Mounted on the back of the track vehicle is the muscle of the MLRS, the M270 multiple rocket launcher. The launcher has 2 canisters that each carry 6 M77 rockets. The crews call them six-packs. The rockets can carry a variety of warheads, including some smart weapons, but the primary warhead is used to deliver cluster bomblets. Each M77 is loaded with 644 submunitions. Each of these bomblets packs the punch of a hand grenade and contains a shaped charge that allows it to penetrate light armor. A fully loaded launcher of 12 missiles can put more than 4 tons of destructive firepower on a target from 20 miles away. LTV delivered the first MLRS units to the Army in 1982. Their effect on Army doctrine was immediate. High-value targets like surface-to-air missile sites, command posts, and logistics centers, previously vulnerable only to air assault, were suddenly reachable by artillery that could get close, fire a devastating salvo, and get out.
Many times it's moved up forward. It has the armor and armament to move up forward and strike those deep targets well deep into the enemy's rear.
Still, key targets are often buried deep behind enemy lines, and it became clear that the rocket's 20-mile reach would have to be extended. In the late 1980s, the Army began modifying the MLRS. The result was the Army Tactical Missile System, ATACMS in Army vernacular. ATACMS employs a warhead with 950 cluster bomblets. The M74 has a superior guidance system and can travel up to 90 miles, more than 4 times farther than the M77 rockets. The MLRS, as a versatile piece of hardware, was ready for action. But no system is complete without the men behind the machine. Their training had just begun. The main role of the MLRS on the battlefield is counter-battery, shooting other artillery that's shooting at them. The survivability of the MLRS and its crew depends largely on its ability to set up, fire, and get out. The soldiers call that ability shoot and scoot, and doing the job right depends not just on the driver's lead foot, but on the entire crew. The MLRS carries a crew of 3, driver, gunner, and commander. Ammunition trucks travel with the MLRS battery for quick resupply in the field. It is the gunner's responsibility to make sure that the loading of the rockets is done right.
When we arrive to pick up the live rockets, I'm making sure that first they're the right ones, making sure that there are no dents, gouges, or anything wrong with the rocket itself that later will make it malfunction.
2 boom-mounted electrical cable hoists load the rocket pods in a matter of minutes. Then the other two crewmen, the driver and the commander, scout for a good firing point.
When I'm looking for my firing points, I want to look for an open area, not too open, not near a road, somewhere I can fire safe without catching too much grass on fire.
Sitting side by side in the cab, crew members rehearse the pre-launch checklist endlessly. Their reactions must be automatic. In battle, there is no time for mistakes. Once an enemy battery has fired, artillery spotting radar pinpoints its exact location. That information flashes through the artillery control network to the clearing station, which in turn assigns the counter-battery mission to the MLRS units in the best position to return fire. All of this happens within seconds, in many cases before the enemy battery can fire off a second round. Once he receives the firing mission, the battery commander orders the ammunition carriers to a safe distance. The MLRS crews begin their pre-launch sequence. The driver activates the suspension lockouts, special hub locks that stabilize the vehicle during launch. He lowers the armored louvers over the windshield, protecting the crew from the scorch of rocket exhaust. The driver then pressurizes the cab, keeping rocket fumes out and providing filtered, breathable air during firing.
It gets hot and stuffy because all it's doing is recirculating the air inside. We have a fan that we set on that pressurizes the cab to a certain pressurization. We have a meter that shows exactly what pressure it's supposed to be.
The gunner basically controls the whole thing. The driver gets you there, but the gunner delivers the rockets downrange.
The computer does much of the gunner's work for him. Battery command supplies the target coordinates, and the fire control system automatically begins maneuvering the launcher into firing position.
And that goes into all these different components, goes through all these crazy wires and stuff, and it tells the launcher to fire this rocket at this particular grid.
The gunner keeps a keen eye on the system, tells it how many rockets to fire, and awaits the order to launch.
If it's at my command, you're basically waiting on them to tell you when to fire. And when it's fired when ready, you fire at your own will.
The entire pre-launch sequence is complete in 60 seconds.
When you finally get that fire command and you push the fire switch, it's like after that it's all downhill.
As the motor fires and the rocket moves down the launch tube, a set of rails spins it slowly, stabilizing it for flight. Once it's free of the launch tube, 4 curved fins deploy and lock onto the rear of the rocket. The rocket then follows its pre-programmed course to the target. After the first rocket is fired, the others follow at 5-second intervals. All 12 can be launched in 1 minute.
After you shoot a couple rockets, you can turn, aim, shift, and shoot a couple more to hit different targets.
As the rocket reaches the target area, a black powder charge in the center of the warhead is detonated by a timer, and the cluster bomblets are expelled in a cloud over the target. Each submunition is stabilized by a ribbon parachute as it falls, then explodes on contact. The submunitions shred everything in their path. 12 rockets from one MLRS unit can level an entire square kilometer.
Just the sheer volume of firepower that a battery of those things can provide you can make the difference in a battle. I mean, if you can mass your fires off your MLRS and you don't need all of them, it really, really makes a difference.
Development of the MLRS did not stop with its success in the Persian Gulf. Meet the newest member of the MLRS family, the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, or HIMARS. It's a lightweight version of the MLRS that gives the early entry forces a heavy punch. On a 5-ton truck chassis, HIMARS carries a 6-pack of MLRS rockets or a single ATACMS missile. It's about 24,000 pounds lighter than the MLRS, small enough to be transported on smaller cargo planes. Loral is developing an upgrade to the launcher drive system that will slash the total pre-launch time to just 13 seconds. The MLRS can fire its rockets and be on its way before the original MLRS has completed its pre-launch cycle, which means for would-be aggressors that they'd better reconsider territorial aspirations based on Cold War artillery. Ask the Iraqis. There's no umbrella against the steel rain.